adult growth groups is a class going over the book of James. Now, the book of James is one of those books. Actually, Martin Luther is the one that said this is a straw man's epistle, and he would do well not even having the book of James part of the biblical canon. But is that really the truth? Should we read, understand, and should the book of James be a part of the Bible? Why argue? Yes, indeed, it should. And so join us Sunday nights at 6 p.m. where we go through the book of James and find out verse by verse, exegeting it, in other words, digging out of Scripture, what James is saying to the original audience and how it applies to our life 2,000 years later. So yes, we will be talking about the controversial passage of James 2:14 through 26, that faith without works is dead. And so come on out to see what God's Word really means about that passage and so much more Sunday nights at 6 p.m. Are you trying to find out where you can listen to more Open Door Baptist Church teachings, sermons, things of that nature? Well, look no further. Go ahead and join Rumble. Rumble is this platform where you can see on this phone and see by this logo right down here. Just go to Google Play Store, App Store, whatever store it is, you could get your digital apps, and download this and find us at OD Baptist on Rumble. This is one of the major platforms that we use to push out all of our content. You can still find us on Facebook and YouTube, a little bit on Instagram, sermon audio as well. Don't forget about them. But go ahead and download Rumble. Follow us on that platform at OD Baptist to get all of our teachings, sermons, messages, things like that. We'll see you over there. Here at Open Door Baptist Church, we take pride in our Diamond ministry. You see, the Diamonds are a group of people that are age 50 or older. And this ministry really just centers around a group of people that love on each other, pray for each other, have great times of fellowship. And there's two main events that happen every single month. Basically, the first one happens typically the third Friday of every month at 6 p.m. here at the church. And what this is we call this our Diamond Dinner. For those age 50 or above, you don't have to be a member of the church. Just come on out here and have a wonderful meal and a time of fellowship with our resident chefs, Will, owner and purveyor of Grumpy Dog, as well as our resident chef, Russ. So be here for that if you're age 50 or older. And then also, typically every single month, they have what's known as the Diamond Excursion. And so just like the word excursion means, they excursion some places to go have a great time of fellowship in great events. They went to Fort Toulouse, they went to a Pioneer Village, they went to museums and things of that nature, and so it's always a great time. And so if you're age 50 or older and you're looking for a group just to have some great camaraderie, great fellowship, and a great time with, come visit us at Open Door Baptist Church and we'll get you connected with the Diamond Ministry. What is a gumshoe? Does that have anything about the sticky stuff we step on going about our day? Does it have anything to do what's stuck underneath the desks at school? Actually not. It's a common misconception. It's a term that's not even used very often today, but a gumshoe is a private investigator, a detective, if you will. What does this mean as far as Open Door Baptist Church? Simply in the fact that every Wednesday at 7 p.m., we have our Gumshoes class that seeks to discover what the Christian faith is, dig a little more deeper into who God and Jesus Christ is, the role of the Holy Spirit for our lives today. We do this through crafts, through activities, Bible lessons and teachings. And so if you have some children that you'd like to get involved as far as the Christian faith, Bible, learning more about God, we'd love to have them here Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. And watch out for that gum. Where are we getting all this information as far as the events that are happening here in the church? Well, I'll tell you where. Our website. Our website's not listed right here. It's actually www.odbaptist.com. But if you check our website regularly, you'll be informed on the events that are coming up. So head on over there, either the website at www.odbaptist.com or Facebook at Open Door. We'll see you over there. Bye. What this world needs today is, well, yes, this world does need love, but this world also needs a healthy dose of prayer. Through a lot of things that are happening with our nation, our community, the public education system, the world, and even the persecution going on within Christendom as a whole, we're asking for those men those men that want to stand up and stand in the gaps and to pray and get on their knees and come before God and just plead on behalf of the country, the homeschooling, the public education, all these things, to join us here at church every Tuesday at 6 in the morning.
All right. Well, so when Pastor Danny asked if I'd be willing to teach one night, you guys know what a squirrel I can be whenever it comes to some of these studies. So the easiest thing for me to do is just present something that I have studied myself. And one of my more recent studies, I've been trying to go through the Old Testament. And I was inspired by some of the people here. I know Brother Wright was one of the ones too that, it's really good to take the Bible in context, of course, and then what I decided to do is study Genesis and then Exodus and basically just move through the books one at a time as the Bible has them presented, but do it in a slow and sort of a expositional manner, because, there's lots of programs out there that say, read the Bible in a year and all that, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's good to be able to have that review, but to really kind of get in there and dig out what the Lord's really trying to tell us and trying to take the context and then, just from a historical standpoint, studying the Bible in order. It just makes sense. So one of the things that always happens with us is and I just mean in general as Christians, is we come across these characters, and I call them characters, and I don't mean like in a story necessarily, but I mean we come across these people who we see these virtues, or we see the things that they go through, and we can really relate. And I've studied Abraham, and I've studied Isaac and Jacob and a lot of the others, like many others, but there's just something about Moses in particular that I really personally deeply relate to. Being self-employed the way that I am, and some of the positions of leadership that God has blessed me just in my life, from just being a father and being a member of the church and things like that. We have all these positions of leadership that are placed on us, and especially whenever we really want to be effective. Most Christians do really want to be effective in their relationships with the Lord. But whenever I looked at Moses and I saw the self-doubt, I saw the pushback. I mean, he pushed back against God to the point that he angered the Lord, and just with the self-doubt that he had, and he had all these circumstances going on. So anyway, I just found that I relate to Moses, especially from the fear standpoint, the self-doubt. And I think that as men, a lot of times, us men, we have a tendency to do that. But what I want to do is start, and I'll try to move through this as quickly as we can. Once we get into the slides, I think it'll move a little bit quicker, but I think it would be wise to just read chapter 2 and 3 really quick. I'm just going to kind of read through it, and then we will jump back to the beginning of chapter 2, and we'll sort of start there, and it'll start moving a little quicker once we get there. So if you have your Bibles, I'm going to put on my reading spectacles here so I can keep up, and I'll just read it really quick. And I'm not going to go, so this is mostly just going to be chapter 2. So we're probably not going to go to chapter 3 because my study really only goes through the burning bush, but we have a lot to cover up to that point. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to read through chapter 2 real quick. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took a wife, a daughter of Levi, and the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him, and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Take this child away, and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and said, Because I drew him out of the water. And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out unto the children, and looked upon their burdens, or looked unto his brethren, and looked upon their burdens. And he spied an Egyptian smiting in Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out of the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together, and he said to him that did the wrong, Wherefore smitest thou fellow? And he said, Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killest the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, Surely this thing is known. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flocks. And the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, How is it that ye are come so soon today? And they said, An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us, and watered the flock. And he said unto his daughters, And where is he? And why is it that ye have left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to deal with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter. And she bare him a son, and she called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. And it came to pass in process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. All right, so here we have Moses, and before we really get started looking at Moses, we need to understand why Moses is important. So Moses, as a man, basically Israel, who was not yet a nation at this time, there had to be a leader. There had to be someone, or that God wanted someone to be able to bring his people out of bondage. And so Moses was going to be that guy, as we'll learn later. But by the close of the book of Genesis, which by Exodus chapter 2, we've just finished with Joseph, and Joseph has died, and basically, if you remember the story of Joseph, basically he was a figure that, he's one of the 12 tribes, or one of the 12 brothers that basically got, he was betrayed, and then he ended up becoming someone who became a statute of leadership for Israel, or Egypt, excuse me. Basically, he had saved his family, and I think he had moved his entire family from where they lived up to Egypt to be able to come up, and let me get my, y'all have to bear with me, my notes are all kind of scrambled here. Basically Joseph was a leader in Egypt. He served the previous Pharaoh at that time, and had a very powerful position. And he had a lot of influence. Basically, a lot of people, too, something to note, there's many people that used to believe that Ramesses II was the king of Egypt round about this time. And I don't know that that's necessarily true, but I did a Answers in Genesis actually thinks that Sesostris I was the Pharaoh who was king of Egypt during the time of Joseph. So that's who would have been the Pharaoh or the king who promoted Joseph to his position of power. Basically, the children of Israel, or the 12 tribes as I'll refer to them, once they were brought to Egypt, they actually had it pretty good. They were given land. They were provided for very well. They had a position of influence. Joseph made sure that they were taken care of. And basically, what ends up happening is the king of Egypt that followed up Sesostris I, basically was afraid of what was going to happen with all of these Hebrews because the family just kept growing, and because of probably having to do with how much power that Joseph had. Basically, we had so according to the Bible, the present Pharaoh at that time, he loved Joseph and allowed him the oversight of the family, and especially once Israel had died. But let's see if I can get through here. So Sesostris III basically becomes Pharaoh, and Joseph has died, and you've got the Hebrews who are now going to be. He's afraid that they're going to become an enemy within, because you have the strange group of people who are living right there inside of the Egyptian land or territory, and anyway, he had a lot of fears about that with them growing. So anyway, the people of Israel, basically they entered Egypt as a family, and they're going to end up leaving as a nation. They would grow, let's see, they were there 430 years, according to Exodus chapter 12, verse 40. So one of the things that I thought was interesting whenever I was beginning this study is how did Israel become slaves? Because at the end of the day, they were basically citizens. They lived basically in the land, and when you read this as a kid, it just seems like, okay, they just got gathered up and made slaves, and I really don't think that was the case. One of the things that we've seen throughout history, basically what will happen is slavery comes by taxation. And I don't know that there's any proof to this. I've done a little bit of reading, but basically what would happen is it's a real easy way to get control of a people, especially if they're tax-paying citizens, is you just keep raising the taxes on them. I mean, and we'll see later that the pharaohs of Egypt back in their day, they were considered gods, and they were worshipped as such. And so any legislation they handed down, it was the rule. So basically, I really think that the way they became slaves is they just used taxation, which created debt. And what would end up happening, I think, in the beginning is they would end up having to either sell their servant, basically, become bond servants, and then later would actually become just full out or full slaves. So they would end up becoming servants. But according to the Bible, the Hebrews continued to grow even in bondage. So the more taxation, the more work they would give them, they continued to grow. So what ended up happening is they just really became just a lesser people. It basically ended up putting a lot of pressure, and basically Pharaoh wanted to stop their growth. They were growing as a people. God had already promised them as a nation that they would flourish, and they were doing that even under all that stress. So the need for a leader. Pharaoh tried to work Israel harder and longer in order to try to slow them down or to stop their growth. And I think the basic idea here is if he's keeping them busy and they're putting pressure on them, they don't have time for romantic encounters with their spouses. That's basically what it boiled down to. They were giving them more work. They were tiring them out. He was trying to snuff out the conception of children, and he believed that it would diminish. But as we know from the end of I believe it's Genesis, or no, excuse me, in Exodus 1, chapter 1, in verse 12, we know that the more work they gave them and the harder that they were, God just continued to bless them. So they continued to have children. And anyway, after all and the thing too is that they were trying to wipe them out, but the thing is they didn't want to completely do away with the children. What they wanted to do was just put enough pressure on them to stop them from growing. They didn't want to get rid of them because they needed servants. So, it's not like they wanted to, in my initial idea, I was thinking, okay, if they wanted to wipe them out, why wouldn't they just go down there and kill them all? Which would make sense, if they're slaves and they were concerned about their uprising. And but the thing is that the Egyptians liked having the servants, liked having all that labor there. So they did not want to basically wipe them out. They just wanted to slow them down. And back during this time, and especially with the children of Israel, there, the Egyptians, even poor Egyptians, were wealthy. It was kind of like America in some ways, where even your poor people were considered wealthy compared to Israel. So anyway, God blessed the Hebrews with growth even under hard bondage, and then when hard back-breaking labor didn't slow down the growth of Israel, Pharaoh ordered the murder of Israel's male infants. So this is a reoccurring theme in the Bible that we see whenever it comes to Israel, and we'll see that God's going to visit this back on Pharaoh later down the road. But he really didn't know what else to do except for get rid of some of the males or all of the infant males. I don't believe that this was an ongoing thing, but I think he wanted to weed out some of the future soldiers or future fighters of Israel. This is where I think there are two very under-mentioned heroes in the Bible, and that is going to be Shiphrah and Puah, I believe is how her name is pronounced. But in Exodus chapter 1 and verses 15 through 22, basically when hard labor, basically whenever the women were having children, these were the I guess if you want to call them midwives who would go and deliver the babies. Pharaoh calls them in, and they were supposed to kill the babies and try to do it in a way that didn't create a big stir. And if you think about it, this is a pretty diabolical thing to think about it, because the midwives, obviously, the midwives were also Hebrews. So it's not like they could go in there and just try to, just take the babies away, and obviously they certainly weren't interested in committing murder. But I think the midwives were probably taught to smother the infants as they come out and then report them as being stillborn or something like that. I mean, I'm sure they were given a plan. But, God used these two ordinary midwives basically to help save the nation of Israel in their own way, because they refused to do what Pharaoh asked them to do. So anyway, with the midwives, we find out later that the midwives refused to do this thing that Pharaoh asked, and whenever he questioned them about why in the world, why are the babies still living? They said, these Hebrew women, boy, they have children really quick. We can't get there in time. And so for this, I guess, pushback, or for refusing to do what Pharaoh wanted them to do, God ends up blessing them. But basically they ended up saving them. And of course, Exodus 1:17, but the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And you've got, in Exodus 1:21, we learned that God rewarded them with large, healthy families. They saved children, and God gave them children as a reward. in fact, the implication here is many children. And this is a great reward. Plus, also, if you think about it, their names are mentioned in God's Word. That's a pretty big, it's a pretty big reward that they were mentioned. So anyway, I think sometimes their names are not celebrated enough for what they did, but God made sure that they got mentioned. So now we're going to get a little into Moses. So we read originally that Moses was a Levite, and both his mother and his father were the house of Levi, and that's going to be very important later, because he and his brother Aaron will actually lead, or particularly Aaron in particular, will lead the priesthood once that's instituted. Moses was a very pleasant, it says a pleasant or happy, he was very happy as an infant. So goodly, basically there from the Bible is translated as pleasant or happy. So he was a pretty laid back little boy. It's, being pleasant and happy, he probably didn't cry a whole lot. Some babies can be fussy. We'll get into this a little bit later, but some of the scholars who believe that Moses had a speech impediment, which, by the way, I don't believe that he did, and I have a pretty good case for that, only because he complains to God about not being about his tongue and not being able to speak, but some will use this and say, well, maybe he didn't cry a lot because he. Maybe it was something wrong with his voice or whatever. So I don't think any of that's true. Anyway, there was a time where his mother could no longer hide him. So Jochebed, who is Moses' mother, she basically had to come up with some kind of a plan, which I think is really interesting too. That this is sort of a question that I came up with is, where did she come up with the idea to make a small little ark? I think about silly things like this sometimes, but obviously they probably had things that floated, and obviously they had boats back then and all that. But I just mean, to be able to make this little floating basket and for that to be the way she would save her baby, that's just an interesting thought to me. How do you devise that kind of plan? You got to save your kid, and then all of a sudden you come up with a way to build a raft and just send them down the river. And if you know the mother's care for a child, it's not that arbitrary. There's no way it can't be. I really believe that Moses' mother, Jochebed, I think her plan from day one was always to build this little device for Moses to float in and to put him in the river at the time that the queen was there, or the princess was there. Because think about it. I mean, obviously the Hebrews knew of God and they loved God, but they were not... I really don't know. We're not super clear as to where was their worship or where was their personal relationship with God at this point in time. So, because I've heard some people say, well, okay, she just had faith that God would save the child, so she just puts him in this basket and throws him down the river. And I really don't think that was the case. I think we have a case of a mother who loved her child very, very deeply and very much. And I think something that kind of gets missed sometimes is that Jochebed devised a plan to save her son, and this was step one, is building this little ark. And there's something else too that's interesting, is that we're not told, but I'm assuming this is so. That's a really dangerous thing, but it's quite possible that the princess was childless. So, again, there's no historic details on that, but she seemed very eager to take this baby in. If she had been a woman with many children, if she had been a woman who had children or something like that, I think she would have been less likely to be so welcoming of this stranger's child, especially a servant child or a Hebrew child, which she clearly knew from the time that she laid eyes on him. He was a Hebrew child. So I just think it's interesting that, as a mother, she came up with this plan. And, I really think that the context of the story, when you kind of take it from Jochebed's point of view, you try to think about it as a mother or I think about it as a parent. I certainly wouldn't have taken one of my kids, or one of my children, and sent them down the river and just hopes that the Lord was going to take care of them. I'm not saying there would never be a situation like that, but I don't think that was the case. But I do think that either the Lord gave her the plan. Either way, this was a very carefully devised plan. So Moses is discovered by a princess, the daughter of the king of Egypt. So obviously, if Moses had been found by anyone else, none of this would have worked. There's no way it would have worked. If it had been any other Egyptian besides someone from the royal family, there's no way it would have worked, because, if it just been one of the citizens just would have gave the child up or something like that. And I think there's a whole lot of detail here that God kind of put in place. Basically, the princess ends up finding Moses, and she names him literally with what happened. She names him Moses, which means drawn, because she drew him from the water of the river, per Exodus 2:10. Then Moses is adopted by the Egyptian princess, but is raised by his own mother. Again, now I really think this is probably where the Lord gets a little more involved. But I think that Jochebed probably sent Miriam down there to do, and maybe this was part of the plan all along. I don't know, but Miriam being there and being able to say, hey, I've got somebody who can nurse this child for you. Let me go get him. So I think that Moses kind of had, being adopted. So he's fully adopted as an Egyptian prince, and he's raised by his own mother. So he really got the best of both worlds, if you think about it. I mean, he gets basically raised by his own mother. So he gets all of the Hebrew teachings. He gets all of the information that he should have about his people. But at the same time, he gets to live among the royal family. Anyway, something interesting too is that when I start reading through this, I like to pick up on these little details. That Moses knows that he's Hebrew and not Egyptian. So if you're putting yourself in Moses' shoes, and because we've read ahead, we know what's going to be happening to Moses. So Moses is raised in the royal family, and he's fully aware of who he is. He's fully aware he's adopted. So it makes me kind of wonder then later, whenever Pharaoh wants him dead, does that have anything to do? Does that add weight to his warrant? So if he had been an Egyptian who killed another Egyptian, would it have warranted death, or would it have warranted the arrest warrant that Moses got? I'm not sure. I would imagine that Moses probably was a little bit of an outcast in his own home, because he was a Hebrew, and it's probably one of those cases where every time his mother was around, they all treated him like he was something special, and then as soon as they left, they're like, oh man, this Hebrew kid, because the royal family was very uppity, and we'll look at a little bit of that here in just a minute too, about the royal family. So anyway, he knows he's Hebrew and not Egyptian. In the outside the palace, for sure, though, he's accepted and treated as the son of the Egyptian princess. We're told by the writer of Acts, who I believe is Luke, in chapter 7, 21-22, he is educated in all of the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. So Moses not only gets the historical teaching of the Hebrew people, but he also gets the absolute best education that he can get in the royal palace. And of course, he gets all of the treatment. I mean, he probably had his own servants. So if you think about that too, Moses basically lived in luxury, particularly in comparison to the rest of the Hebrew people. He really had it. He really had it good. He received a blended education. He could probably read and write both Hebrew and Egyptian languages. So he knew both cultures. Knowing both of the cultures, if you think about it, that's going to be extremely valuable later as he is trying to negotiate the Exodus. It's going to be important that he knows how to approach the king. It's going to be important that he knows how to speak to them and to be able to have credibility. So having that inside information is going to help him. For the most part, he's mostly treated as if he were the actual birth son in the royal family, like I say, outside of the walls of the palace, receiving the high education and training that all men of the house of the Egyptian king received. And, obviously, too, this would include the combat training. If you do any reading, you'll find out that the Egyptian royal family actually received combat training. So Moses, he got the full package. I mean, he really did. I thought it would be interesting too to take a look at what history says about the Pharaoh's lifestyle. So I did some looking, and there were a couple little articles, but I just kind of broke it down real quick here. It says the lifestyle of an ancient Egyptian king or pharaoh was one of great luxury and privilege. As the ruler of one of the world's earliest civilizations, the pharaoh was considered to be both a political leader and a god on earth. The pharaoh's daily life revolved around religious rituals, administrative duties, and leisure activities. They would rise early in the morning and perform a series of religious ceremonies before attending their political and administrative responsibilities. These might include meetings with officials, reviewing reports from regional governors, and overseeing the construction of public works projects. When not engaged in official business, pharaohs would often indulge in leisure activities such as hunting, fishing, and boating. They would also attend banquets and other social events, often accompanied by their consorts and high-ranking officials. Pharaohs lived in elaborate palaces or complexes that were designed to reflect their status and power. These structures were often adorned with intricate carvings, decorations, and contained luxurious amenities such as private gardens, pools, and even artificial lakes. Overall, the lifestyle of an ancient Egyptian king was one of great wealth, power, and luxury, but also one that required a great deal of responsibility and commitment to the religious and administrative needs of the kingdom. So bearing all of these things in mind, this is what Moses grew up in. He grew up in the lap of luxury, but something else too that we often forget, Moses grew up around worship of the sun gods. Think of all the Egyptian gods that are out there. I'm not saying that he participated in them. Who knows? I don't know. But he was well schooled in all of these things. He literally lived in all of this luxury. And the reason why this is important is because as we approach what's going to happen to him, it's going to affect his mindset. It's going to affect how he approaches these decisions that he has to make and all these things, knowing that he was raised the way that he was. So Moses grows into adulthood in the palace of the king, completely separate from the Hebrew people, by the way, at the time. So he's pretty well off. At around age 40, according to Acts 7:23, God puts a burden in Moses' heart to go visit his people. And so there he observes the evil treatment of the Hebrews. And, this is where it's pretty well assumed, and I think rightly so, that his mother is the one who educated him on the Hebrews and told him who he was and explained to him everything that's happened. And because if you think about it, if Moses' mother had not told him any of this, he would have had the same attitude toward the Hebrews as the Egyptians did. But he didn't, because of his mother being able to speak to him or to teach him his own history. it almost kind of makes you think too, at what point did Moses' mother, whenever he was growing up, tell him, "Hey, by the way, you're adopted and I'm your mom"? I mean, that had to be that had to be a strange situation, because she was his nanny and he had a mother. The princess would come in whenever and then one day his nanny tells him that she's actually his real mother, and so that's an interesting conversation, I'm sure, that they had. But yeah, so everything we just read about the luxury of the palace and the king, Moses lived in that for 40 years. That's a long time. I mean, I'm 50. I'll be 52 this year, so that would be. I mean, I remember my 40th birthday very well. I mean, that's a long time, to live in the palace. So what ends up happening is once he he learns about his people and he sees the evil treatment of them. He basically, as he's walking along, he decides he's gonna walk out there and see what's happening, and he has compassion upon a brother. He's at this point in time in his life, he's lived long enough to have thought about it. I really think that it was a slow progress getting to this point. I think that he knew he was one of the Hebrews, and I think really God started putting this compassion in his heart, toward his own people. So basically, he sees a brother who's getting a terrible beating, and he's angered enough to commit murder in order to save him. So we know that number one, Moses, living in the house of the king, he knows the consequences of murder if caught. So the Bible also told us whenever we read it earlier that Moses looked this way and that. So this is premeditated. It's not like he just acted in the moment. He made a clear decision that he was going to kill this Egyptian, and so ends up committing murder. And this is where we have to start taking Moses' lifestyle. We have to start taking his history involved. What would make Moses decide to do this? So think about where Moses is at. He's a member of the royal family. He sees his people going through all of this. What does he think is going to happen when he murders an Egyptian? I mean, the only thing that I could think of is he literally decided in that moment to become a vigilante. Obviously, it's not like he planned to leave the palace. I mean, I think he just saw this opportunity and he wanted to get involved. He wanted to save his people in his mind. Maybe being a vigilante, maybe garnering the affections of the people by stepping out of the palace and being a person of power with all the wearing the outfit and ornaments of the royal family. And then he makes this observation and decides to get involved. In me, I'm trying to put myself in Moses' shoes and go, why would you make a decision like that? What would make you step outside the palace, take a walk, and then all of a sudden you're going to commit murder? Maybe it was an act of passion out of anger. It's not really, I'm not really sure about that, but definitely, it could be that he thought he was going to be a Hebrew vigilante. I don't know. He definitely wanted the people to live, without being beaten and all those things. I think that he began to see how harshly the people were being treated. But Moses does show a strong sense of justice, and that's supposedly what a vigilante is someone who takes the law into their own hands, and so that's not always a good thing, but. Basically, we see that sense of justice, and we'll see that in much greater detail later in Moses' life. And this is obviously this vigilantism that he was portraying here, I really don't think this is one of those things that we could justify, but I think this is a situation where God kind of, steps in. And obviously, this was part of what God wanted from Moses, or he wouldn't have put him through all of these things. And we'll see later that he uses it to his honor and glory. But something interesting here, though, whenever I was reading the little Acts account on Moses, is that we learned that Moses thought that the Hebrews would see that God would deliver them from the Egyptians by his hand, possibly through this act. I don't know, but the people did not understand. So I'm just going to run back to that Acts 7:25. You don't have to turn there, but I'm just going to read you what that says. 7:25. Let me grab my glasses here so I can see this. But yeah, so it says, Acts 7:25, for he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. And so let me go back and read 24. It says, and seeing one of them suffered wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. So Moses probably was taught about God by his mother. He understood the history that the Hebrews had with God. He understood he was in a position of influence in the palace. Also something interesting here too. At this point in time, and this will come up later, but whenever I was saying that that Moses, some people think he had a speech impediment or whatever because he was saying he was slow of tongue when he was arguing with God. We probably won't get there tonight, but like when he's arguing with God, he says, "Lord, I'm slow of tongue. You don't want to use me." Well, according to Acts. Verse 22, it says, Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in words and deeds. At this point in time, where Moses is at in his life, he's mighty in words and deeds. A lot of it from his education, probably. He was probably a pretty good orator. I mean, how could you be a prince in the royal family and not be able to speak in front of people? I mean, you would have to. They're very ceremonious in the things that they would do. So I think maybe Moses saw himself as he was going to be. This is going to sound silly, but I mean, this is more of a question. So I would be open to input here, but this vigilantism. Did he think maybe he was acting on behalf of God, and he thought that somehow trying to gain the favor of the Hebrew people, he was going to kill, one of the slave bosses of Egypt and win the favor of the people. And the Bible tells us that people misunderstood, or they understood what he wanted to do, and ended up turning him in.
Well, I think not knowing what he did, he was surprised. He knew he
Yeah.
had murdered.
Yes.
So he thought, clear.
Yeah. Well, which is going to bring us to an interesting thing too. Is how did they find out? If no one else was around, how did word get out that Moses committed this murder? So that literally the next day, Moses tried to make. Yeah, he thought nobody was looking, but there was somebody looking, and it was. Clearly there was only one person that could have started blabbing. that was the guy that was getting his behind beat by the by the work boss, whatever, And think about that. Like this, Moses just saved you, and you hate him so much, or you dislike him so much, that you would start running your mouth about him, about something that Moses did, and there's an immediate resentment of Moses for this act. It's an immediate resentment. So, he finds out that the secret of his crime is no longer a secret, because he goes and he's trying to be this. Moses is literally trying to be a person of leadership to his people. Because think about it, you have these two Hebrews, and they're getting in a little dust up outside, and he goes out there and he's like, "Hey guys, whoa, 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 let's," he's trying to be a leader, and immediately they both turn on him, and they're like, "Oh yeah, what are you going to do? You going to kill us too?" And instead of trying to listen to what he's got to say, and you got to remember, Moses is probably walking around with all of his gold bracelets and stuff, and he's got his his princely uniform on, or whatever that is. But he becomes a fugitive, and then we learn that Pharaoh finds out about it. So not only are all this little chit chat going on about what he did, somebody gets the message up to the king, and it's a really good reflection of how much they despise Moses. And Pastor Danny and I had a funny conversation this morning, and I think Moses was looked at as the house mouse. If you guys know Southern history, you had slaves who worked the fields, and then you had slaves that worked in the master's home, and the ones that worked in the fields did not like the guys that worked in the house, because they got hot food, or they got good food, they got good clothes, they were close to the guy with all the money, and so they got really special treatment, and they were often hated by the people that were out there, breaking their backs in the field. And so here you have Moses, who's been living the life of luxury, eating the best food, best education, best this. He's probably got his own chariot, own horses, all these things. And Moses is literally, I think Moses is genuinely coming out trying to become a credible leader amongst his people. And what they see is, Moses being condescending. I think they view Moses as being this condescending man from the house of the king, and they don't like him at all. And so whenever he breaks the law, they are the very first ones that turn him in, because normally if it had just been hearsay, whisperings, or gossip, or whatever, something that happened, it usually takes a few days. The Pharaoh knew the very next day. So so somebody was like, "Let's turn this chump in and just get him out. I'm sick of looking at him. I'm tired of him being around here." So all Moses could do is run, because he becomes an instant overnight wanted felon. And so now we have to remember again, going back to how Moses is accustomed to living, he has to drop everything. He's been used to being pampered. He probably had servants that bathed him at night. I'm just saying, when you lived in the palace, you had people that did everything for you. And now he's on the run, and he starts running as far as he can. Anyway, once he starts running, I have a map here that this is. So I looked at a bunch of different maps that showed people have different opinions. Most of the credible people think this is likely the route that Moses took. I can probably see it better on the TV than I can on my computer. But it's interesting too, because I think the path that Moses takes is important, because I think he's going to learn some stuff along the way. Now we don't have any. The Bible really doesn't give us any information about Moses' journey other than the fact that he ends up in Midian. But I think it's important, because remember, there's a time that's going to be coming not too far down the road where Moses is going to have to know all of these lands. He's going to have to know all of these areas. And I think that maybe this is God's way of teaching Moses some stuff that he may have to recall some geography later. I don't know, but it's important, because he's going to be boots on the ground on this for a while. So here's something interesting. Midian is 300 miles away from where the Egyptian capital was back during that time. 300 miles. So it basically says that, let's see here, Moses took basically like a 2-week journey. And I forgot, I should have put my reference in there. But anyway, yeah, it was a very short time. And we also know that it wasn't that long because he was still dressed like an Egyptian when he was at the well. But so if Moses walked 20 miles a day nonstop, it would be a 2-week journey. So you're looking at 300 miles. So he basically runs for 300 miles. Yeah, it may be. Yep, that's true. But he basically goes about 300 miles and then decides to take a break. And you're probably right. He probably had a camel. It doesn't say that he physically took that journey. And also because the well that he stopped at happened to be a watering well for we know for sure for camels and stuff, because we'll learn about that in a little bit. But I can tell you this at this point. Think about how Moses probably felt. He has fear beyond belief because he's wanted, and not just wanted, but Egypt was one of the most powerful nations on the planet at this time. I mean, he was literally a wanted felon by the most powerful king probably on the earth at that particular time. He probably, I mean, I don't know what all his mom taught him, but survival skills probably wasn't one of the things he learned in the palace. I mean, he all of that luxury he knew, all of that thing. See, I can imagine that in a 2-week time period, Moses is getting broke down pretty good, emotionally and mentally and physically. He had this idea in his head, this plan that he was going to become this great leader to the Hebrews via the house of Pharaoh or the king, and that whole thing just gets obliterated in one night. And the very people he's trying to help hate him, and he has no plan. Like he's literally just trying to put as much distance between him and Egypt as he possibly can in the shortest amount of time. So anyway, he was probably completely exhausted. So anyway, he ends up stopping at a well in Midian. And I actually had some pictures up there. I don't know what I did with them. But anyway, he's afraid, he's exhausted, he's thirsty. He's still dressed as an Egyptian. We learned that. Another thing too that I thought about is why, was it fear or whatever? Why would Moses not change his attire? Wouldn't that be the first thing you would do if you were wanted, especially if you're leaving Egypt? I mean, the first thing I would have done is grab me a robe. I'd have found me something else to wear, because outside of Egypt, you kind of stand out like a sore thumb. And again, I was kind of thinking about that. Maybe it was to his benefit to stay dressed as a prince. I don't know, because for anyone, unless there was some way for news to get out, not everybody would know that he was a fugitive. So maybe it was a way for him to get supplies or whatever. He's dressed in the royal outfit. I don't know. I just thought it was strange. Why not change clothes? Maybe he was just too stressed to even think about it, just trying to get away. But anyway, I don't know. He clearly did not necessarily consider his appearance. But he humbles himself to the daughters of the priest of Midian by standing up to the pushy shepherds and drawing water for them. So, again, remember, Moses has lived his life as a prince. Yet, here are these women at the well, and as you know, in the Middle East and culturally, women are considered to be of lower stature than men. So it wasn't normal for a man to help women, especially doing the work, and especially some guy dressed like in Egyptian royal clothing. So that was probably quite strange, and that's probably also how come. If you think about it, when Moses stands up to the shepherds, his outfit may have had something to do with him backing down and going, okay, this guy, he must be somebody, the way he's dressed. And so he ends up standing up, and whenever they try to shoo away these ladies trying to get water, and Moses stands up for them, they back off. There doesn't seem to be any kind of scuffle going on here. But he was used to being served, not serving, and yet God broke Moses down during that 2-week journey. We don't know I would love to know what Moses went through when he first fled. But something mentally happened to him where he was like, you know what, he was at the end of his rope. And so he had nothing left but to try to be humble.
I think God turned 40, started having to work with people.
That's true, yeah.
30-something years plus.
Yes, yeah.
Palace, it takes 40.
It does. Well, and like I say, I think that was kind of a slow, like you said, I think it was kind of a slow process where, him going from, just being in the house of privilege there to slowly taking notice of things that his mother probably had been teaching him about that kind of sunk in, because he could have gotten involved way before the age of 40, but he didn't for whatever reason. That's true. That's true. Yeah, that's exactly true. So after that, by the way, this is a picture of today, a modern day picture of what is believed to be the well at Midian. They've got it all fenced off and everything. If that's true, that is the most inconvenient location it could possibly be. Obviously back in those days the fence wouldn't have been around it, but it's a giant hole in the ground, and it's not on flat level ground. It's basically on a rock. So if this is true, getting water out of that thing was not easy at all. And the women who were there, according to the Bible, they were drawing water for the camels and probably their water for their cooking or whatever stuff that they had to do back at camp. So they had to draw a lot of water out of there, which is probably why the shepherds got annoyed, because they had a lot of water they had to draw too. And but Moses made some quick work of it. Anyway, we'll keep going real quick because we're almost at the end. So we have the priest of Midian, who's Jethro, gives his daughter to Zipporah, to Moses to wife, which we find out, because the story here is the women come back to camp, and their father is like, boy, well, you guys got back really quick, and they said, hey, there's this guy dressed like an Egyptian out there, helped us draw the water and shooed the shepherds away. So obviously Jethro, being the kind man he was like, hey, invite him back, invite him in. Well, Moses had nowhere else to go, so anyway, Moses ends up staying, and obviously I don't think Zipporah was given to Moses right away. I think basically what happened is Moses comes and says, hey, I have nowhere else to go. Can I stay here? And he ends up becoming a shepherd and creating a new identity for himself. And then while he's there, Jethro takes a liking to Moses, and then he ends up giving him his daughter Zipporah as a wife. Now, this is up for some debate, but there are a lot of Bible scholars out there who believe that Zipporah and her family were of African descent or Ethiopian, maybe. I don't know if any of that's true or not. I just thought that was interesting. Doesn't really matter, but it just brings a new light, because when you see the movies, they all show these glamorized people that play the parts in the movies and all these things. And when you get down to it, I mean, Moses was just by the time he had reached this point in his life, I mean, he was a shepherd, and Zipporah was the daughter of a shepherd and priest. And so I don't know if that's true or not, but I just thought that was interesting. Definitely that region would lend itself to something like that. But anyway, during this time, the king of Egypt dies, and Moses spends as much time in the desert as a shepherd as he did in the house of the king of Egypt. So the king that wanted Moses dead is now dead himself. And God heard the groaning. During this time, the children of Israel being just really cranked down on even more, and says that they're groaning and wailing, and after they've been there for this amount of time, the Bible tells us that God heard their cries, and He remembered His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And anyway, around age 80, can you imagine? 40 years a shepherd, the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in a burning bush as he was tending the flock at Mount Horeb, or below Mount Horeb. Now, I found a couple of images I thought were really interesting. I could really lean into some of this, but, the burning bush, I think that's a cooler picture myself, Moses, walking up on something that caught his eye. We imagine that Moses was talking to the bush, but I suspect that and if you were here for that Genesis study I did, I fully believe that Jesus Christ Himself was standing in the middle of that. He was talking to a person. He wasn't talking to a bush. And, we have images in Revelation and things of what, we know that Christ was in the fiery furnace and all these things. I fully believe He was standing there before Moses whenever he approached that bush, and he stops him and says, "Take your shoes off." And so anyway, I thought that was interesting. So Moses is being called, or Moses sees the bush. He approaches, and basically, Moses calls him. So something to clarify here too, Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai are said to be the same mountain. They're also known as the mountain of God. I believe that's correct. So that he was basically at the base of that mountain, which is, I guess that's probably why they show that depiction right here. But that's also true. But something that's interesting I thought about this, Moses turns aside, he sees the bush, he turns and he goes, and as he approaches, God calls out to him. And great principle, and I don't remember who I heard this from. I wish I was the one that thought of it. But when we turn aside to seek God, He'll call to us. And I thought that was interesting. Moses turned aside. He really did want to do, I think, right by the people. I don't think up to this point he had never heard directly from God Himself. I don't think. There's no record of that. But anyway, Moses also has to remove his shoes before he approaches the ground where the Lord is. Anyway, something important here is that we must approach God on His terms and not ours. I think that's an important lesson there to learn. As Moses approached, God told him how to approach, and he had to listen, and he did those things. So this is basically the end of it, and it had a little bit of a rocky start. I thought I had all my notes in line here, and I told Pastor Danny to begin with. I said sometimes this stuff gets all rattled around, and then I get it in the wrong order, and that's exactly what happened in the beginning. And then about halfway through, it all started making more sense. But anyway, I apologize for all that. Little rickety start. But anyway, the reason I want to stop it there is because if I get a chance to present the later study, if I can put everything together, the conversation that Moses has with God is a great lesson all by itself, and there's a lot there that we can learn. So anyway, I'm going to pray real quick, and we can be dismissed. And I thank you guys for your attention. Father, thank you so much for this time that we had together. I just pray that you would just help us to look at Moses and just some of the things he went through, and just see how we can apply that to our lives, Lord, as leaders. We're all leaders of something, Lord. We're all leaders everywhere we go, even if it's the grocery store or the post office, Lord, we can be leaders. So help us to just glean that knowledge, and just guide us through this next week. And pray that you would just give everybody a safe trip home. Just thank you again for those who have attended. Again, be with those who have taught in Awana and Brother Brock's class as well. Just bless them. We just ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.